Our next speaker comes from Slovenia, from the University of Maribor. Professor Benjamin Flander is an expert in the theory and philosophy of law, human rights and criminal justice. And the title of Professor Flander's presentation is The State Sovereignty in the Trenches, a legal perspective on vigilantism in Slovenia. Professor, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it feels great to be back to Budapest. Like speakers before me, I wish to thank to the organizers for inviting me to yet another unique conference. Content-wise, my presentation will differ a little bit from the presentation of my colleagues. But as you will see, it does concern the issue of state sovereignty in its own way. Essentially, my presentation brings a summary of my scientific article, which is the outcome of the research carried out within the framework of the Professors Network. And at the end of this year, the article is supposed to be published in the Law, Identity and Values Journal, the same as also articles of other colleagues from the research group. I will address legal aspects of vigilantism in Slovenia. More particularly, I will speak about the way Slovenia and its legal system reacted to the sudden appearance of anti-migrant vigilant groups in 2018, and I will do this by first defining vigilantism and identifying its recent appearances in Slovenia, then by outlining from a theoretical perspective the divergent state responses to vigilantism. Here you will see that basically there are two ways how states respond to vigilantism. The first one is tolerance and cooperation, at least to a certain level, while versus this approach there is total exclusion and prosecution. And I will demonstrate in my presentation how Slovenia and its legal system resorted to the latter, which is to the exclusion and prosecution of the anti-migrant vigilant groups, and how their appearance and activities were understood by the authorities as a threat posed to national security and sovereignty. I will just make an outline of my research for those who are interested in detailed analysis. Those I would kindly invite to see my scientific article. Regarding the definition of vigilantism, I will not go through all this, what I prepared. I will just point out that it became clear at the very beginning of my research that it's a slippery social phenomenon. Therefore, it's impossible to resort to a straightforward universal definition. It is often referred to as the popular justice, and also as the concept of people taking law into their own hands. And as such, it is attributed by both positive and negative connotations in different contexts. However, defining vigilantism descriptively, one could say that it is an arbitrary act of, or a set of arbitrary acts of seemingly official nature committed by an individual or a group in the belief that an injustice has occurred, which the state do not want to or cannot correct due to its dishonesty or corruptibility, or due to its general inefficiency in the performance of the official duties. Also, it could be described as unlawful and intentional conduct or use of force by private citizens to prevent or punish someone who is the perpetrator of real or perceived forms of deviance. Anyway, most academic definitions of vigilantism see violence or threat thereof as an essential component of vigilantism. While vigilantism occurs all over the world, it is more prevalent in some places than in others. In the country on the sunny side of the Alps, as Slovenia is sometimes referred to, vigilantism was an almost unknown phenomenon before 2018. But this changed tremendously in September 2018, when social networks and media were flooded with photos of formation and training of a masked and armed group of people, and soon it became clear that pictures were taken in the forests of Pohorje near Maribor, and that the group is called the STYRIAN Guard, led by Andrej Šiško. also founder of political party United Slovenia. This is non-parliamentary party which has support less than 1% among the voters. Also, quickly it became clear that first reactions among people were that people didn't believe that such things can happen in Slovenia, as it is also sometimes called oasis of peace and non-violence. So they thought it's either a joke or fake news, but quickly surprise turned into shock. And also quickly it became clear that most people are of opinion that groups such as vigilant and parliamentary and paramilitary are unacceptable and inadmissible in Slovenia. And this was also shared by state officials, for instance, our President of the Republic, Mr. Borut Pahor, who will complete his mandate in the beginning of December. And just 2 days ago, Slovenian voters elected a new president, female this time. President stated for the media that creation of such an armed group was completely unacceptable, that Slovenia is a safe country where no one who is not authorized to do so is allowed to arbitrarily take care of the security of the country and its borders. And interestingly also, news about the masked armed men saluting and marching in the idyllic Slovenian forests was also published by some foreign media, such as HINA in Croatia, even New York Times. And searching internet a little bit, I found that a journalist from some Slovenian tabloid visited the 3-day STYRIAN Guards military training camp, and he reported that everything in the training camp is like in a real army. Like members learn how to handle the weapons. There is group hierarchy, and there are ranks. Members were ranks, and they have ambulance service, etc. Mr. Šiško, by himself, he explained that it's a voluntary defense group in the region of Styria, that it has more than 100 members, and that they will not allow themselves to be disarmed, and that they will respond if the homeland and nation at risks. And members, as well as Šiško and members of the STYRIAN Guard, they explained that the most serious threat in their eyes to the security of the country and the nation are asylum seekers. Ministry of the Interior and the police, in their first official reaction to the publication of these videos, photos and everything, they stated that the very fact that establishment of various forms of self-security, organizations of citizens had become more frequent in Slovenia was the consequence of the increase in illegal immigration. Most objectionable behavior of vigilance, according to police and Ministry of the Interior, were their presence and training near the state border, wearing uniforms and imitation weapons, using symbols such as coat of arms and flags, and giving the feeling that they actually perform official security and defense tasks. Certain actions of members of these groups, according to representatives of police and Ministry of Interior, were a serious security risk for the state and citizens, and moreover, foundation and activities of guards were a serious and direct threat to sovereignty and integrity of the Republic of Slovenia. Throughout 2019, the STYRIAN Guard has become notorious, increasingly active and present in the public space and in discourse, and as a consequent legal and security expert in Slovenia, as well as officials and other politicians from the ruling liberal coalition, came to a conclusion that the situation is very serious and that an immediate action is required. However, police and Ministry of Interior drew attention to the fact that actually the members of this group could not be prosecuted except in rare cases for minor offenses as well as for criminal offenses. And namely, they could be prosecuted for minor offenses only if reported by the local residents to the police, that the offenders, by their acts, caused them feel uncomfortable or threatened, and this was according to the relevant provisions of the Protection of Public Order Act. So, and similar was with the prosecution of their potential criminal acts. So there was, and in fact, with the exception of the prosecution of the leader of the Styrian Guard and one of his officers, in quotes officers, the state prosecutor's office did not prosecute any of the members of the Styrian Guard upon receiving reports from the police. But anyway, consensus in the government coalition and among the experts was reached that an adequate response by the police and other state authorities to the activities of vigilance was impossible, and that the legal regulation urgently needs amendments. So now I prepared too much stuff, obviously, for 20 minutes. There's an interesting story about the genesis of these amendments. At the end, look, they were prepared by the then ruling left coalition, but then they resigned just after the coronavirus thing started. And then the conservative coalition and the parliamentary majority of Janez Janša took place. They somehow didn't feel to amend the legislation. They were somehow, tolerant to these vigilant groups. But then the opposition, left opposition, prepared a proposal, and this proposal was then adopted by the parliament with the support of some of the deputies from the political parties of the government, conservative government coalition. That's quite interesting that it doesn't happen very often in Slovenia, actually. So what was these amendments? Two acts were amended. One was Protection of Public Order Act, and the other one was the State Border Control Act. To put it, to summarize it and to simplify it, to simplify it, because this wording is rather complicated. I would say that most of the typical acts of vigilance were stipulated as minor offenses according to the public protection of Public Order Acts. For instance, an amended Article 11 now stipulates that a fine of 500 to 1,000 euros shall be imposed on an individual who carries, displays, or uses imitation weapons intended for alarm, or other objects that look similar to weapons on such a manner that he or she gives the feeling of performing the duties of the official or military persons. And if the act is committed in a group, the fine is twice as high. And similarly, also for the wearing of uniforms or camouflage clothing, whatever would look like a uniforms of official personnel. And also, if such acts would be committed in a group, then the fine would be twice as high in comparison if such acts would be committed by an individual. And there was also an additional paragraph added to Article 11A, stipulating that an individual in a group of at least two persons who wears uniform or clothing similar to official uniforms and gives the feeling of police or military force by using symbols, coats of arms, flags, or by creating the impression of a hierarchical organization, or by using vehicles bearing recognizable marks, shall be fined between 1,500 euros and 500 euros. Similar additions were introduced also by the amendments to the State Border Control Act. I will not now address all these details. I will just add to this that after these amendments have been introduced, there were no more incidents and almost no more journalist reporting on the Styrian Guard. with an exception of Mr. Šiško's statement in the media that the STYRIAN Guard will challenge the new minor offense law before the Constitutional Court. And according to my information, they did so, but the case is still pending before the Constitutional Law, so we don't know yet what the Constitutional Court has to say about it. So the second way Slovenian legal system reacted to this sudden appearance of vigilantism in Slovenia is the criminal prosecution and conviction of the leader of the STYRIAN Guard. Again, it's a complex chain of judgments of all levels, so it would be difficult to present you all the details of this. I will just say that after his speech the formation and training of the STYRIAN Guard in Apače, the police arrested Andrej Šiško and he was then detained on the suspicion of committing the crime of incitement to violent change of the constitutional order, and also of some other crimes related to possessions of arms. But later then, after the criminal investigation was initiated and house searches at 5 locations were carried out, and Šiško was detained on remand, Maribor District Prosecutor's Office filed an indictment against Šiško only regarding this main crime, incitement to violent change of the constitutional court order. And the main allegations referred to his speech in Apače in front of approximately 60 members of the STYRIAN Guard, where Šiško said different things, including such things as that the police and the army are incapable of providing security, that the current government must be removed, that the prime minister is a traitor, and so on and so on. And also the indictment also referred to Šiško's other statements and the fact that he established the armed formation. Šiško himself pleaded not guilty. There were 2 hearings that all together last 12 hours in total, and Šiško turned around the allegations, actually saying that he called for the respect of the constitutional order, not for its violent change. He also submitted to the court a book titled Peace, Freedom, Victory, and he also pointed out that the STYRIAN Guard was part of the program of the United Slovenia movement, and that it was as such confirmed by the Ministry of the Interior. Of course, yes, the political party was formally confirmed, but not really the armed formation. And that what he was doing was actually a provocation and so on. His defense attorney pointed out that the accusations against her client were abstract, and that Mr. Šiško was indicted for political reasons, and the trial was a political construct. The court found Šiško guilty as charged. Šiško then challenged this decision, including filing a request for the protection of legality in front of the Supreme Court of the Republic of Slovenia. This request is a extraordinary legal remedy in Slovenia according to the Criminal Procedure Act, but Supreme Court disagreed with convict's statements and rejected his request as unfounded. Among other things, the Court of First Instance correctly, according to the Supreme Court, the Court of First Instance correctly assessed that the convict's conduct exceeded the limit of permitted political association and expression, and that the criminal law response was necessary, appropriate, and proportional in order to ensure the pursued legitimate goal, which is the protection of the state, its sovereignty, and its democratic constitutional order. Now, Mary Nel, she's a scholar from South Africa who wrote an excellent doctoral dissertation on vigilantism in South Africa. She claims that vigilantism is a fascinating and fertile topic for legal research, but she found that it's actually neglected among the legal academics, and that this seems to reflect the fact that in most legal systems there has been no legislative attempt to consider vigilantism in depth, meaning, for example, there was no defining acts of vigilance separately as specific criminal and minor offenses. Meaning, what Nell had in mind was that at the end of the day, the motives of vigilance are much different than the motives of ordinary criminals, and that this should be considered when stipulating laws regarding their specific acts. Anyway, and also, according to Nell, courts seem to share the popular culture's assumption that the vigilant acts, and even more so violence, deserves harsh condemnation. This is prosecution and conviction. And without exception, the case law considering vigilantism has to say something negative about it. I consulted my co-referent, who will speak after me, and I realized from this discussion that the situation is in Hungary is quite different, actually, and maybe what Nell asserts in her doctoral dissertation is not quite correct, because there are also countries which do not have this exclusionary approach, Hungary, for example. So I'm coming to the conclusion of my presentation. It seems that what Nell asserts, at least for the first glance, it seems that what Nell asserts matches with the situation in Slovenia. Namely, amended Slovenian legislation seems to resort to what Nell calls the popular culture's reflective, albeit unreflective assumption that vigilant acts, and even more so vigilant violence, deserve zero tolerance and harsh condemnation. Well, I agree with this if we take a look at the amendments of the minor offense legislation. However, if we study the case law, then we see that that Supreme Court pointed to the constitutional aspects of prosecution of criminal offenses against the state security and sovereignty if and when committed by vigilance, and essentially, according to the Supreme Court, the category nature of the constitutional prohibition of any incitement to violence and the incrimination in the criminal court do not free the criminal court from assessing the proportionality of the authorities' reaction of freedom of political restriction of freedom of political speech and assembly at a concrete level. And according to the Supreme Court, Court of First Instance has met this requirement, and moreover, the Supreme Court itself had applied both tests of constitutionality, meaning the test of legitimacy and the test of proportionality, when deciding on the application for protection of legality filed by Mr. Šiško. So my point is here that the case was not as straightforward as it may seem at the first glance. To conclude, in my research as well as in my presentation, I did not want to engage in exploring vigilantism theoretically and scientifically. Also, my focus was not on exploring the extent to which vigilantism is a product of weak or eroded state legitimacy, or the extent to which it threatens state sovereignty. Instead, I wanted to address vigilantism at a concrete level in a specific Slovenian legal context, which is unique, I believe, because this phenomenon practically did not exist in the independent Slovenia before 2018, and the country obviously was not prepared for it. So my main motivation undertaking this research was to evaluate and explain to the international public the reaction of the Slovenian state and the legal system to this sudden appearance of vigilantism, which brought a really great unrest into Slovenian society. And dear colleagues, it's now up to you to judge me whether my mission was completed successfully or not. Thank you very much.